So just a little bit of background for those who are joining us the first time. We started this webinar series based off the back of a number of interviews that we conducted with mentors, over 30 mentors, for our recent book, which was called Mentoring Entrepreneurs: The Insider's Guide to Shaping Success. And there was so much richness in the interviews that we did for the book, and we could only feature a few kind of quotes and case studies that we thought there would be value in turning some of the conversations into a more in-depth webinar series, picking up on specific topics. So really excited to be here today and have you here. I think the topic on asking questions is a really important one in mentoring, but in life in general. One of my personal frustrations is engaging in a conversation with another person who asks no questions of me. And I'm often leave these interactions feeling a bit unsettled by their lack of curiosity. And the only way to sustain the conversation is by focusing entirely on them. So I think the art of asking great questions is vital in mentoring to achieve its objective, but also in life in general. So I think we can all learn, however many questions we ask, can all learn how to do it a little bit better, and that's what we will do today. So a quick introduction to Anne and Duncan. Thank you both for being here. So Anne Gitari is joining us from Nairobi, Kenya, and is an entrepreneur skills development expert and an entrepreneur herself, as she has worked with incubators and innovation hubs in East Africa, supporting training, mentoring, and coaching. And she actually joined one of our programs as a mentor back in 2020, I think, 2021. And then Duncan, who's based in the UK, helps founders and their teams shift from nascent to growth. He gets his energy from helping leaders see the different complexities that often stall the growth of a company. And he has mentored and coached extensively, and has sometimes been criticized from an early age in his university days for asking too many questions. But now he is the doctor of questions. So welcome both today. So we thought, just to kick off in a webinar talking about the power of questions, we invite you to pop in the chat now or save it up to the end what your question is about asking questions, so that we can make sure that we address those along the way, and or at the end we'll have about 15 minutes for questions as well. So if you have a burning question now, put it in the chat. And if something emerges as we go along, feel free to put it in or ask it at the end. So great, thank you both again for being here.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
And I thought it would be useful to start to really kind of go back to basics. So what is the purpose of asking questions? And let's focus it in on a mentoring conversation, but kind of draw parallels to other conversations as well. So so why do we ask questions? And I guess in mentoring this is quite important, because mentoring is often associated by those who haven't been extensively involved in mentoring as giving advice. And a lot of people might come into a mentoring relationship as a mentee and say, well, I want my mentor to tell me what to do. I want them to give me advice. But actually, often that's not the purpose of mentoring. So what is the purpose of asking questions in a mentoring relationship?
It's really about helping the mentee achieve awareness. You don't want to create a dependency. So you want to ask questions that allow them to recognize that they have the resources, the tools, the capability to have, to find solutions to their challenges. So really, I think it first begins with you as the mentor understanding of going into the mentoring conversation with the awareness that the mentee actually has what they need to solve their problem. And once you do that, you have that mindset, then you have the ability to ask the questions that, allow them to see what they are currently not seeing, to create that awareness.
So what you're saying, and yeah, so everyone kind of has the answer themselves often to their own solutions, but also to their own problems, but they don't always see that. They prefer to go externally for someone to tell them what to do, but actually through probing and questioning, then they come to their own solutions. Duncan, what would you add?
Yeah, I would agree with everything that Anna said, and I would add to that as coaches or mentors, one of the things that we've got to try and establish is what is it that is important in the conversation that you're just about to have with your mentee or your coachee. So there's been some, many books written about great questions and great mentors. One that I've read recently, written by a guy called Charles Duhigg, talks about what is it that super communicators do. And really what super communicators are able to do is to kind of figure out really quickly in the conversation, does this person need to be hugged, helped, or heard? And so when a mentee comes to me, sometimes the first question that they ask, actually deeper beneath that is a clue as to actually, do they just need to be listened to because they've not had a chance to express a frustration or concern for a while? Do they just need to verbalize out loud an idea and get some form of validation? Or are they coming with a very specific, I need to get an action plan on X? And so I think, questions are the gateway to figuring out what is it that this mentee needs at that point in time.
I like that. Questions are the gateway to yeah. Good. So I thought we've got a little exercise for you. So if everyone has a pen and paper to hand, this is going to be a very practical demonstration of the power of questions. And I'll hand over to you, Duncan, to lead us through that.
Super. Yeah. So this is actually an exercise that I was exposed to in the pandemic by a gentleman who's written a book called Questions Are the Answers. And it's written by a guy called Hal Gregerson. So I've adapted one of his exercises. It's called a question burst, and it's a really powerful exercise, I think, which highlights the importance of how powerful questions can be. And what I'm going to do is just take each of us through an exercise. So I want to reassure everyone, you're not going to share anything with anyone on this call about the exercise. But what I do ask of you is if you could just give me a thumbs up, take your camera off if you can, or just a thumbs up if you can identify a personal challenge that you're currently going through at the moment, something that's frustrating you. It might be a problem at work, it might be something at home. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to lead you through an exercise, and you're going to just jot down some thoughts onto a sheet of paper. Okay, you're not going to disclose this to anyone. Okay, the only thing that we're going to ask of you is to, in a second, Suhana's I think going to do an emotion word cloud and tell us one or two emotions that you currently feel about this problem. Okay, so in a second, Suhana will open that. But before we start, just to reassure you, I'm going to stand here, give you some instructions, and it's going to be a timed activity. It's going to be about 3 minutes long. And your job is going to be just to rapidly write down some questions. Okay. And after 3 minutes, I'll let you stop and we'll kind of do a quick debrief on it. Okay. So just a quick heads up. Could people just give me a thumbs up? Have they got something that they can apply this to? So a problem, a challenge, a frustration. Just give me a, yeah, I've got a few thumbs up there. Okay, good. Perfect. So you've got that in mind. And what I want you to do for a second is just reflect in the moment about this issue. And if it's appropriate and you're willing to, could you perhaps just jot down a 1 or 2 words in the menti.com cloud that would describe the emotion that you're feeling at the moment about this particular issue? So I can see, and this is anonymous, by the way, so no one will know what you've put, but so, okay, fear, conflicted, frustration, uncertainty, insecurity. Yeah, great. So we're just going to give you a couple of moments and we will come back to this at the end. So good. Okay, we're getting a little bit of a pattern here. So if I could ask Suhana, if you could just maybe shut that down and we'll just capture that and we'll come back and revisit that at the end again. That's super. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you an instruction in a second to write down rather, as many questions that you have about the problem that you're currently dealing with, that you're frustrated with, okay? And there's 2 rules, okay? The first rule is you can't put down any solutions. You're only able to write down questions, okay? And so just to give you an example, I did this myself a few weeks ago with someone, and their problem was, I'm feeling a little bit worried about our future revenue pipeline. Yeah, so that was their problem. And what I was asking this person to do was to generate as many questions that sit behind this problem. So they kind of said, have we got a plan? Is the plan understood? Who is aware of the plan? What other things could we try? So these are all questions, not solutions. Okay. So 2 rules. Only you can ask questions. And secondly, try not to ask toxic questions. And let me just explain what I mean by toxic question. A toxic question is a question that's really focused on the negativity at a deeper level. Okay. It's not forward thinking. Yeah. So, I'm going to just put my timer going. And by the way, the reason it's 3 minutes is my science has worked out that in a minute, you should be able to generate approximately 4 to 6 questions. So I'm aiming for you to come up with somewhere between, 14, 15, maybe to 20 questions in the next 3 minutes. Okay. So, on your starters orders, and off we go. Just write down questions, just questions. So that's a minute up. So hopefully most of you have got more than a couple of questions down. Maybe you've got 5 or 6. Keep adding to that list in minute 2. Some of them might be very similar questions, but that's absolutely fine.
My pen's run out with all my questions.
So you're approaching the end of the second minute. So I just want to ask you now to really go deep, just really reflect back on this problem, this frustration, this issue, and just get down a few more powerful questions that you think could unlock some answers to this issue. Okay, going to give you about 10 seconds, and then Suhana, I think, is going to open up another word cloud, and we're going to ask you one question to input into it. So if you are finished, that would be great. Suhana, are you able to open up the second one?
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. Great.
Yeah.
So what I'd like you to do now is, now that you've done that 3-minute question burst, hopefully most of you have identified a few questions. What I'd like you to do now is, reflecting on the problem as you see it now, how has your what emotions or feelings do you have towards the problem now? Has it changed anyway? For some of you it may have, for others it won't have, but just put down any feelings or emotions that you're now experiencing in connection to this problem. And okay, we've got manageable, less fearful, clarity, more focused. Keep going. This is great. Enlightened, organized, doable, manageable. There is a way. Enlightened. Okay. Can be solved. Greater understanding. Super. There is way. Now, Suhana, maybe as a takeaway from this session, you might be able to do a photograph of the 2 different cloud bursts that we had, if that's possible, and maybe just put that in the chat, because that would be a really useful thing to do.
I'll do that.
And I'm going to just ask maybe for you to bring that to a close now. Thank you, everyone, for participating in that. And I'm going to just put a question out to everyone. What's just happened? And maybe you want to just come off mute and say, or maybe you just want to put it in the chat. Either is absolutely fine. But for 3 minutes, you had a problem, and you came up with a number of questions, and there was quite a clear pattern there around how your moods and emotions had changed from the start to the end. So I'm just curious, what do you think happened? And it's okay just to scribble some thoughts down in the chat. And if you have a question, that's fine too.
We have Purity who's showing her hand. Go ahead if you can. Yeah, go ahead. Feel free to unmute yourself.
What happened? I think I paused to think about the problem. Like, the questions helped me to take a moment and actually analyze the problem. And that helped me to see the possibilities, or start thinking even about the possibilities. So that's
Great.
what happened. questions. Yeah.
Thank you, Purity. Yeah, great. Helped you think about the problem and helped you see possibilities. Yeah, good. Does anyone, we'll just have a couple more comments, and then I'm just going to perhaps give a bit of context as to what happened. So Kristen has put down, it's helped me organize my thoughts. Thank you for writing that. Gerald has just put down clearer. Great. Does anyone have an urge to add anything to what's been said there? Okay. So the real lesson that I take from this exercise, and by the way, I use this myself regularly, and I use it also when I'm coaching and mentoring people as well. What it's really powerful, I think, is it helps the coachee or the mentee really reframe what the problem's about. Yeah, it breaks it down. It helps you see it from a different perspective. Okay. And if you could just picture for a second, if Anne or I or any of us would to start a mentoring relationship with you now, and let's say that we had already built a bit of rapport, this would really kind of allow us to ease into what would we want to focus on next. Okay. And I'm going to respond in a second to a question I think that Emily's kind of put in the chat. If we were to go a step deeper with this exercise, and we're not going to do that now, but I'm just going to give you a bit of a clue, is if you were to look at your list of questions, I would encourage you to read them and then circle maybe 2 that really intrigue you that you would like to go deeper on. Yeah. And when you pick those 2, and it's just a gut feel, those are probably, that's the starting place that a great mentoring relationship and coaching conversation could be opened up. Yeah. And I just want to respond to something that Emily's written. I noticed that the questions I asked at first evolved. So, for example, can I do this? And the later thought, will I be trained to do this? Yeah. Which again, it looks at breaking it down. So that's really powerful. Thank you so much. I don't know whether there's anyone who's got questions on that exercise, but if you'd like some more resources, I've got a couple of templates. I'd be more than happy to share those if anyone just reaches out to the Human Edge, and I can forward those on to you after the session. But back to our MC, Maya, over to you.
Thanks, Duncan. That's a really nice little, exercise, a little bit of self-mentoring, to a tool to help us in solve challenging situations we have. I'm going to use that. So thank you. So I want to kind of go in a little bit to setting the scene as a mentor, to be able and to enable you to start to ask some of these powerful questions, because I think possibly it could be a little bit daunting for a mentee in their first couple of conversations with their mentor, who might then start grilling them and asking them some really difficult questions. So what do you need to do as a mentor to get to the stage of the relationship with your mentee that you can start having some of these conversations and bringing in some powerful questions into it?
Yes. So first thing you want to do is, establish rapport. Make sure you have a good relationship so that you can be able to ask various questions. So the first thing, generally get to know each other. So, ask them, tell me about yourself, what you do, what you're trying to work on. Broadly, you could then go ahead and tell them about yourself in building rapport, and maybe ask them, is there something else maybe you want to know about me? And so first, you really want to build rapport. I think the next thing you want to focus on is the context of how you're asking, let me say the environment in which you're asking the question. And reminds me back when I was in college learning communications and culture, my lecturer said, words find meaning in context. So your questions will also find meaning in the context that you're in. And how do you then determine what context you're in? So you could look at about 7 aspects of context. And one of them, to begin with, is check on yourself, be self-aware. So how am I feeling? What am I reading in this, situation? How am I feeling about the situation currently? And this will change from session to session with the mentee. So the next level of awareness of the context is that of the mentee. How are they feeling? How are they presenting in that moment? The third level is the time. What's currently happening at that moment? Where, maybe they've come in from very heavy traffic and they were not pleased about it. So what's really happening? Is there a child crying in the background? Just understand what the time is like. The fourth one is awareness of the past. So what have they been struggling with? What has been bothering them? What happened in the last session that you probably want to bring in now? The fifth is the language patterns. What's coming up in the language patterns? So are they deleting information, generalizing statements? Are they distorting their language? So language also is a concept. The sixth is keywords. Listen to keywords. What are the keywords that are coming up in the room? Where is their emphasis? And that also means the things they're not saying with words, the tone in which they're speaking, the expression, the body language. And the seventh aspect of context is incongruence. So when you're sensing there's a difference between what they're saying and their actions. So they may say, I want to raise funding, or I'm looking for finance for my business, but then they are not actively doing it. So when you have aspects, those 7 aspects in terms of context, in terms of setting the scene for the questions, be aware of those 7 elements that then what questions to ask.
Really interesting. And I guess that kind of speaks a little bit to some of those you're only going to ascertain through active listening. And originally we were going to call this webinar Active Listening and Asking Powerful Questions, but then we thought actually that we'd shorten it, but they're very interlinked, kind of the active listening and asking powerful questions. Is there anything you'd add to that, Duncan?
Yeah, I thought it was there's 7 points I think were really very spot on that Anne has mentioned. I think for me, what makes a question a powerful question is when you're able to really understand what's this conversation really about. And when we are in a dialogue with people most of the time and we ask questions, the tendency or the default is for us to go into the facts and get information, to extract data or information from the other person. And the reason I think we decided to do the exercise that we started with today was just to demonstrate I didn't actually get any information from anyone other than 2 words, an emotion. And yet you all shifted forward at some level on your problem. Yeah. So it really beautifully highlights a powerful question, raises awareness, like Anne was saying. And it really, I think, helps the coach or the mentee, the coach or the mentor to really understand what support does this person really, really want? Are they wanting validation? Are they wanting reassurance? Are they wanting just to be able to air and express an idea for the first time? And so for me, what makes a question a powerful question is when you can kind of like look at the holistic context of what we're operating in.
And can you share, can either or both of you share an example where a line of inquiry, so a series of powerful questions, or just maybe simply one powerful question has led through a breakthrough for the person you're mentoring?
Yeah, I mean, yesterday, it was, no, not yesterday, it was Monday. I was working with a very successful entrepreneur that's kind of in charge of a relatively large team that's working across a number of different countries, Ghana being one of them. And he was really bothered by a negotiation that's coming up with one of his more senior software engineers. And he knew that this was going to be a negotiation around their pay, around their salary. And so he came along to the session, and he literally physically just went straight into, yeah, and I've done my data, and I know that this is, her facts are wrong. She thinks that she should be getting inflation plus X, and her percentages are incorrect. And I let him rant for about a minute or so, and then I just asked her, I said, "Here, let's just press pause for a second." And I asked the question, what is this really all about? Why does she want a pay rise? And what was really powerful in the conversation, as we were both smiling, is neither of us kind of knew, because he was making an assumption on some of the things that were going on in his head. Yeah. And so what actually panned out is he realized that he was actually getting into the detail of needing to be right around analyzing data. As it transpired, because he had the conversation with this individual later on that day, and he emailed me the next day saying, "Duncan, she just wanted to feel valued. And this negotiation was not about more money. It was actually feeling recognized and valued." And so for me, that's an example there of just really simply asking the question, what's really behind this issue? Why is this coming up for you? What's sitting behind it? And I think that's a pretty simple question to ask, but hugely powerful too. So
nice. And that illustrates a little bit in the book. We've got a very simple tool called the 5 whys. So drilling down something that might appear on the surface, and at surface value we take it for that, but actually what's underneath? Why is that happening? Why? And your example just there, Duncan, was, I think, an illustration of that. So not getting bogged down on how do we do the pay rise? Is it right or is it wrong? But why does she want that? And understanding that. Do you have, I think you've got some examples, Anne, as well, of some situations where powerful questions have led to a breakthrough?
Certainly, I think mine are more within the mentoring conversation. Just asking simple questions like, how are you feeling now about this situation? I think there's something we've done in the exercise. How are you feeling now before, and then how are you feeling now after the exercise we did with Duncan? Other good questions, sort of like, what do you want to do next? I think that was one of the questions I asked myself in that exercise. What do you want to do next? What do you want to do today to move forward? Yeah, some of those are really great, powerful questions that, remember, the idea is to always be moving forward, shift forward in awareness, shift forward in action. So when you're asking powerful questions that allow for that forward movement, then, you get quite a lot done.
And Maya, might we ask the audience and the group today, maybe just to share in the chat, what was the most powerful question that you asked yourself in that exercise at the start? What was, if there was one question that you had to pick out that really kind of got you thinking differently or shifted you? What was there anything special about that question? What type of question was it? Was it a reframing question? Was it a open question? Was it a closed question? Was it, you know, I'm just curious if people could share. And Anne, I think you sort of said that one of the questions that you found interesting was, what am I going to do next? So it was kind of like a future action question.
I just read through mine, Duncan, and
Yeah.
a lot of mine start with "Do you know? Do you know?" That's a pattern through mine. So
Yeah.
actually, I maybe need to reframe how I'm asking myself the questions.
Yeah.
Because they all start in a very similar way.
Yeah. And Maya, thanks for sharing that. A lot of us kind of get into a route and a pattern of asking a certain style of question, which is, do you know, is a closed question, yes or no? Yeah. And so part of, I think, asking powerful questions is having a good balance of action-orientated questions, reframing questions, open questions, challenging questions even. But I'm just curious whether there are any other insights or ahas from the group around types of questions that were powerful for themselves.
Maybe I could mention that there was sort of, I can't even call it a temptation, sort of like a default to ask toxic questions. You know, when you first said it, I thought it was impossible, but then I realized how fast you can go in that direction. Because like immediately one of the questions I wanted to ask myself is, why are you not doing this now?
Yeah.
You know, that doesn't help, you know, shift forward into awareness or action. So I kept refraining from asking questions that made me feel bad about myself, about not doing what I needed to do, and really look for questions. And maybe that's where Maya is struggling. I should have rephrased my questions.
And I think that's really powerful, because that in a confidential sort of coaching, mentoring relationship, that actually gives us something to kind of like talk about, which is around, there's obviously some harsh judgment going on. You're judging yourself unfairly, possibly. Yeah. And that's useful for us to be aware of, isn't it? It's kind of a sense of another level of self-awareness, which is, are you being overly harsh on yourself? Or is there something else behind that? You know? So
yeah, so I really like that the most powerful questions are ones that help us to build different levels of self-awareness. I think that's a big takeaway from me. So not seeking information so much, but getting to know ourselves better, and for our mentor also to get to know us better. So that leads me on a little bit to how we can get better at asking questions. You started talking about this, Duncan, by kind of categorizing different types of questions, and I guess having an awareness of the different types of questions one can ask is a beginning to get better. But how can we get better at asking better questions? Sorry, that's a bit of a mouthful. And what do we need to work on, both as individuals and mentors?
yeah. Anne, did you want to go, or shall I start off?
I could go and start with a bit of an embarrassing story.
Yeah, great.
I would ask questions when I you know was learning how to be a mentor and also a coach. I would come into the coaching or mentoring conversation with a list of questions, up to 25 questions at any given time, you know, of just, I'm going to use all of these questions in the conversation. And then I quickly realized that because I was looking at my list, I wasn't listening to the mentee, and I was doing them a great disservice. So the question, how do we get better at asking questions, is to really get better at listening. Just really, really listen. And because you're listening to everything, think about all the 7 aspects I mentioned earlier. You're listening not just with your ears, but you're listening with your eyes. You're watching their body language. And if you're looking at a list of 25 questions, like I was, trying to pick the best one, you won't be listening. So I guess you get better at asking questions by really listening. And a lot of the times you realize you don't need to ask all 25. You probably just need to ask one question that brings about the awareness, that allows the mentee to shift forward towards a given action. I think one of the things I've learned recently is something called suspending, where you really don't need to ask a question. Just let the mentee's words linger in the air so that they get to listen to their words, as well. And from there, that allows them to arrive at a level of awareness. So I don't think it's really about getting better at asking questions, because the questions find meaning in the context, but really it's to get better at listening.
And curiosity plays quite an important role in there as well, doesn't it? Because it's your own kind of personal curiosity, but curiosity for the mentor that will enable you to go down particular lines of inquiry.
Certainly, because when you're asking questions based off the list, like I was talking about, you've already formed a judgment. You've already come to a conclusion. Unlike with curiosity, you don't arrive at that very quickly. With curiosity, you want to know more and understand more and empathize even more, and put yourself in their shoes. So curiosity is definitely a big part of the conversation.
Great, thanks. And Duncan, so then maybe a question for you. If you're in a situation where you've been so actively listening to your mentee and not formulating your next question in your head, and you come to a natural pause in the conversation, and you don't have another question to ask, how can you deal with that situation, or how do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's a good question. That happens to me frequently, Maya. And I've learned, and it does take confidence, but try this, is to just simply say, do you know what? I don't have a question. Where should we go next? And I guess I'm sort of being a bit tongue-in-cheek there, because there is a question behind that, which is, where would you like to go next? But it really leans on what Anne said, which is sometimes just silence is actually very powerful. And particularly in the world that we live in now, we mentors, going back to what we talked about at the very start, are often seen as kind of advice givers. We have a tendency to want to step in and provide or give advice or give direction, whereas a lot of the time, actually, and that can be useful, sometimes just by allowing that silence and saying, look, I'm not sure where to go next. Where do you think we should go? It's a really gentle way to allow the mentee to kind of steer. Do you know what? I'm not sure, but I think I'd like to explore this, and that gives you another direction. And it made me think about the question that you asked at the start, which was around how do you develop your skills to be able to develop being a better question asker? And I think it's observing and just watching. And I was part of a study many years ago with a professor from Sheffield Hallam University, who was an engineer, and he studied what was it that really successful solution sales people asked in complex sales. And after years and years and years of research, he found that there were certain patterns of questions that the most able diagnosers of problems were constantly asking. And it was a real range. There was problem questions, there was implication questions, getting the client to talk about the problem, what's behind it. There was situational questions, and there were action questions or goal-orientated questions. So when you next observe someone who's being interviewed, you know, in a TV interview, just take note of the questions and ask yourself, what type of question was that? Was that a directive leading question? Or was it an open reflective question? And what this, I think, does certainly has done for me is it's just really made me more conscious of what is a good question and what is a less valuable question. So, yeah.
And that someone else actually who we interviewed for the book said that one of his favorite questions was, what questions should I be asking you that I'm not asking you? So on that note, we'll turn it over to all the participants. What questions should we have asked that we haven't yet asked? Or what questions would you like to ask of Anne and Duncan in the last 10 minutes? So yeah, feel free to come off mute and ask your question. We'd love to hear from you. Ask your question about questions, or you can pop it in the chat as well. The mentoring organization, we're not scared of silence either. So
Sorry, I had a question to ask about active listening. Are there certain techniques involved, or can you form certain techniques about active listening, or is it just something you develop with time when you're with a mentee?
great question, thank you. I don't know, Duncan or Anne, if you want to.
Yeah, I'm happy to give a first perspective, Gerald, on your question. Active listening is being able to be really present in that moment. And Anne said something earlier, which I really buy into, which is not just listening with your ears, but also listening with your eyes, and even listening with your gut and your heart. So if you were to examine a group of school children playing in a playground, or even fighting in the playground, and you were to tune into your heart, you would get something back. And so for me, active listening is being really present and almost, Gerald, not really worrying about what's the next question. It's just tuning into what you're noticing. And sometimes just so reflecting that back is actually really powerful because it demonstrates active listening.
We have a course at the Human Edge. Well, actually, a big part of what we do is mentor preparation and training, but we have a online on-demand mentor training course now, and a big part of that is or kind of one of the 6 modules is around becoming a better listener, and we talk about, I think, 6 levels of listening. So I can't remember all of them, but at one end it's kind of listening to respond, or to put your position forward. So that's kind of very much at the lower end of the listening spectrum. Somewhere in the middle is listening to be able to ask your next question. So very kind of what we were talking about before, really conscious of, okay, what is the next question I'm going to ask? Where am I going to take this? And then at the kind of very top level is listening with empathy and understanding. So really getting to kind of, yeah, empathize with the person that you're talking to, and understanding where they're coming from. So yeah, there's quite a lot written on it as well. So I encourage you to explore that further.
And Gerald, I'd add to what Maya's saying is it's actually very, very difficult to be in an active listening state for a very, very long period of time. I've demonstrated to my daughter this morning that I was not very empathetic and able to listen to her when she was interrupting me on a project. And you know, it's so all great listeners still at times find it difficult to be actively listening for a long, sustained period of time. So also just be kind to yourself.
Yeah, and just to add to that, maybe a quote that has helped me over time is, the value of the cup is its emptiness. And what that means is when we come into the conversation, we come empty to listen, just like the cup. We cannot put anything in the cup, no tea, nothing, no coffee, if it isn't empty. So when you think about that, how you presenting yourself as you come into the mentoring conversation, and you've got to really rid yourself of any judgment, of anything that was going on, of anything you come up after the mentoring conversation. Really come in empty. And I think the best thing you can do, or you can equate that emptiness to, is curiosity. Just come, ready to learn and listen.
Nice. I'm gonna see that.
We have oh yeah, we have a question from Purity in the chat. How do you know that a mentorship session has been successful?
And Purity, I try to answer it with a question just by sort of demonstrating it. But I think the simplest way to answer that is to ask the ask the mentee at the end of it. Has today been helpful? What's been useful? What have you learned? What have we learned? Because that will give you instant. And even if they can't answer that with any positive comment, that in itself is still good learning.
Certainly, and the question I like to start at the beginning of the conversation is, what solutions do you want to create today? And therefore, towards the end, we'll ask, do you feel you've created any solutions as well, now that we are at the tail end of this conversation? Then you...
I think your internet is a bit in and out, Anne.
End.
We've got you back. We lost the end bit of the last couple of 30 seconds.
Sorry.
Of saying.
So I was saying, let me just quickly recap that. When you start the conversation, you have an objective, a goal. And so the mentee will ask, will figure out what solutions they want to create in the 45-minute, 1-hour conversation. And so you have a baseline. And then the end line would be, what solutions have you created today? And that could be the measure of whether the mentoring conversation or session was successful.
Great, thank you. Couple of more minutes if there's any final burning questions. And if not, I'll just hand back to you, Suhana.
We have Annette who raised her hand.
Okay, sorry, I didn't see. Over to you.
Yeah, no problem. Anne, you mentioned that list of, I don't know, 25 or 35, so much about active listening, list of questions, and that you then at one point noticed that this is distracting you from the actual task. How did you, because this was the resource of, this was your resource, and how did you remember those questions? Or was it then more intuition? Or how did you then manage to ask the right question without the list?
Good, that's a good question. Well, the truth is, as you go over those questions over time, they get into your memory. But really, they are not applicable without the right context. So you've got to also know, when do you apply what question, and also how do you structure it for that particular context. So I guess what I would say is, if you have your list of questions, 25 questions, yes, you can have a chance to look at them as a mentor, as a coach. review them, but then know that they will be applicable in different contexts, you know. Sort of like if you have a child and you need to teach them different things, you can't teach them all the things at the same time. So you then know when to teach them a certain skill that based on the context or where they are at their point, a certain age in their lives. So if you do have a list, yes, that's fine. Know what's on that list, but also learn when to apply what question. And the other thing is you don't want to ask the question as you've written it. You kind of want to get the nuance behind it and then figure out what's the context and what then should I ask at this particular moment. Hope that answers your question.
Great, thank you. So yeah, I think we're coming to the end of the session. Thanks so much, Anne and Duncan, for your time today and really insightful conversations around asking better questions. I'm definitely going to come away from it being more conscious when I'm speaking to people and yeah, structure my questions a bit better. And also I've got a tool to solve my own problems or to start to solve my own problems and then go out and maybe, as you said, Duncan, the starting point for a mentoring conversation. Yeah, it's very focused. So thanks everyone for joining us today. We've got our next webinar in 3 weeks' time on the 11th of July, which is around giving feedback and having challenging conversations. So that's the last in this webinar series. So do look out for that and sign up to it. And so Hannah, I don't know if you've got any final words to say.
No, I actually was going to talk about the last event webinar that's happening on the 11th. I'll send you an email after that this session with the recording, the different resources that we've shared, and the registration link to the upcoming webinar. So yeah, that's it. And yes, if you're keen to explore and to strengthen your mentoring skills, feel free to join and sign up to our mentoring skills and practice course that's online, and where you get to practice with your peers all these skills and behaviors. So yeah, that's it. Thank you very much for your time today, and we hope to see you on the 11th. Thank you.
Nice to see you all. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.